$12.57, or send check or money order for $12.95 plus shipping and handling to the address on your screen. Have your credit card ready and call 1-800-257-1257 to order your Hydron Plus.
This is CNN.
Countdown for Columbia, but windy weather threatens to delay this morning's scheduled launch.
The number of Americans filing first-time claims for unemployment benefits takes an unexpected tumble.
A new report apportions blame for the Los Angeles riots and warns the same kind of trouble could be triggered again. Hello, this is Day Watch. I'm Donna Kelley.
Good morning, I'm Bob Cain. The Shuttle Columbia is poised at this hour on the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center. NASA is prepped to send it and a 6-member crew off on the 51st shuttle mission. The big question mark now, the weather. For the latest, we turn to CNN correspondent Charles Jacob. Charles?
Well, Bob, right now it does look like there may be a launch delay. This is due to 2 reasons. One, high winds at the shuttle landing site at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and bad weather in the transatlantic sites in Spain and Morocco, where the shuttle would have to land in case of an emergency engine problem. Right now, the count is at T-minus 9 minutes and holding. Winds are above the 15 knots NASA allows, so there's an 80% chance of a delay of the scheduled launch and a 50-50 chance they'll get off today. Now, this 10-day mission is supposed to be totally scientific. Astronauts will launch a mirrored-covered Italian satellite from the cargo bay. Scientists plan to fire laser beams from Earth at that satellite. The idea is they can use the satellite and lasers to measure movements of the Earth's crust, and one day that might enable them to predict earthquakes. There's also a scheduled test of a new TV system that will enable astronauts to maneuver the shuttle's robot arms with minute precision. That'll be necessary, maneuvering those robot arms to help build any space station. Other experiments concern bone loss and motion sickness. But critics are pointing out the satellite could have been launched by an unmanned rocket and that most of the experiments are automated, so they ask, why is this mission being flown at all? NASA still says, though, this proves the shuttle is a valuable platform from which humans can perform experiments in space. The launch was originally scheduled for 11:16 a.m. Eastern Time. It looks like it's going to be delayed. They're in a T-minus 9 minute hold because of weather at the landing sites, transatlantic, and the weather at the Kennedy Space Center. But whenever the launch comes, CNN will provide live coverage. Donna?
Charles, thanks very much. The Labor Department is reporting a big drop in the number of first-time applicants for unemployment benefits. The figure for the week ending October 10th was 368,000. That is down 15,000 from the previous week. It's the 3rd straight drop and the lowest number in more than 2 years. The government says the number does not include people receiving benefits from a special emergency program. These new jobless numbers could prove to be a plus for George Bush in the closing days of Campaign USA 92. He's repeatedly said he believes the American economy is poised for recovery. Both the president and Bill Clinton are hitting the hustings again today. The Democratic standard-bearer is continuing to campaign in the West. And New Jersey, which had a big increase in weekly jobless claims, is on the president's itinerary. The president goes to New Jersey following a 2-day swing through the South. He plans to do Dixie again this weekend. The president has canceled Saturday appearances in Maine and Connecticut in order to stump in Alabama and Louisiana, and he will campaign in Montana on Sunday. Clinton visited Montana and Colorado and Wyoming yesterday. His aim to woo disaffected Republican voters and fight possible inroads by Ross Perot. While leading in the national polls, Clinton vows to keep campaigning like crazy through Election Day. One indication of that, a decision to alter his schedule to squeeze in a stop in the battleground state of Missouri tomorrow. Aides to Ross Perot say that their candidate may hold some rallies and town meetings during the next 12 days. No word, though, on where or when. The key to Perot's campaign strategy continues to be his self-bankrolled television commercials.
Well, voter turnout may exceed expectations on Election Day, November 3rd. One reason, Americans have registered to vote in record numbers this year. CNN correspondent Deborah Potter reports an ease in the registration process, and a full plate of candidates may be among the reasons why.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
They've been signing up all across the country, getting registered to vote.
I think it's important enough this time around that everybody tries to do what they can.
I just never voted. I never really felt like the need to, I guess, until this year.
In Connecticut, election officials predict a record number of registered voters, a sharp turnaround after 20 years of decline.
The volume is greater, in that respect. And there have been many groups out there that have been registering.
One reason for the influx, it was easier to sign up this year. In some states, registration cards were hand-delivered as pizza toppings. And 30 states now have so-called motor voter laws, allowing people to register to vote when getting a driver's license.
We are seeing that when you reduce the barriers, more people will register and vote.
The final numbers won't be in for several weeks, but the outlook is encouraging. From Louisiana to Michigan to Washington, D.C., this year's registration figures easily beat 1988. Registration drives aimed at young voters who traditionally have the lowest turnout seem to be part of the reason.
Come on, let's go do it.
Another major factor, Ross Perot.
Is there any question in your mind about my commitment to you?
His appeal put thousands of new voters on the rolls.
People had to get registered in order to sign petitions, and a lot of the people who were Perot backers were people who had been out of the system for a while.
For many new voters, the recession is the biggest motivator, especially in minority communities, which were targeted with special registration drives this year.
This morning, you have the right to register and vote and do something about it.
But as new voters were added to the rolls, many others were dropped.
We do have some outrageous procedures that take people off the rolls for not voting instead of working to encourage them to vote more. And we need to remedy that, and that, of course, makes our work harder.
The question, though, will all these newly registered voters actually vote on Election Day?
There's some indication that we're looking for a good turnout on November 3rd because the city of Los Angeles evidently has run out of absentee ballots and had to order more. So that's a good sign.
Studies do show that in past elections, turnout has far exceeded the national average in states where registration is easy. And with more states joining that list, the likelihood is that voting this year will be up too. Deborah Potter, CNN, Washington.
There is word today that a State Department search through Bill Clinton's passport records reportedly extended to efforts to find information about his mother. The Washington Post reports the Clinton search was in response to Freedom of Information Act requests from news organizations. The newspaper says the search dealing with Clinton's mother turned up nothing. One official said looking under a relative's name is routine. Another, though, expressed surprise at that action.
President Bush says the release of old Vietnamese photographs of U.S. prisoners of war is a major breakthrough in the POW-MIA controversy. The Pentagon is examining the 4,000 photos and other documents and plans to notify relatives of servicemen about the information. In the meantime, Senator John McCain said some of those photos were of him in captivity and many others were of Americans released after the war. There are reports that the Bush administration is moving to normalize relations with Vietnam. The remains of at least 37 bodies have been found in a village in El Salvador where a bloody massacre occurred nearly 11 years ago. The scene looks like a typical archaeological dig, but instead of artifacts, scientists are uncovering bones, many of those of children. The excavation in El Mozote offers evidence of a 1981 massacre conducted by Salvadoran government forces trained by the United States. Survivors reported more than 1,000 people were killed by the death squads. The victims were accused of collaborating with leftist rebels.
In our Watch Your Dollars segment today, a government study says U.S. workers get along better if their companies have overseas owners. In fact, says the Labor Department, their paychecks are 22% fatter on average than workers for private firms owned by Americans. That amounts to a bonus of nearly $500 a month on average. Fringe benefits are about the same whether the U.S. company is owned by Americans or people overseas. 1 in 20 Americans worked at international companies in the U.S. as of late last year. Well, there's no indication negotiators are getting anywhere at the trade talks in Brussels. The European community and the U.S. are trying to jumpstart negotiations on a GATT agreement, that's the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, on lowering trade barriers. Washington has been pressing the 12-nation European community to cut farm subsidies, which the U.S. contends gives European farmers an unfair advantage. Germany told the EC Executive Commission today to keep talking until a deal is cut.
Drug companies may be putting the squeeze on consumers in the United States, according to a congressional report. The General Accounting Office found U.S. consumers pay substantially more for medicines than their Canadian neighbors. Prices are an average of 32% higher for the most frequently prescribed drugs. 121 medicines were studied. Most turned out to be more expensive in the United States. Investigators found the Canadian bargains are the result of greater price regulation and volume buying by the government. TV buffs may one day be able to dial up their favorite videos over the telephone. Videos by phone is the idea of Bell Atlantic Corporation. Under the plan, customers order movies and other video services by calling a central computer. The computer transmits a scrambled signal using home phone lines. Bell Atlantic has asked the Federal Communications Commission to approve a request for a test project. It hopes to try the service in the mid-Atlantic states next year.
Coming up on Day Watch, if it happens again, as a new study says it could, would the Los Angeles Police Department be any better prepared for riots?
And we're waiting in a couple of minutes for the 6 astronauts aboard the Shuttle Columbia to embark on a mission to help learn more about earthquakes. The latest word we get is that NASA has decided to hold the mission at least another 20 minutes, which would put it up at about 11:36 Eastern Time. There you see a live picture, and what they're waiting for is the winds to go down. So we will watch and wait with them.
The last thing the average person wants is the average car. That's why the new Mazda brought you the return of the pure sports car, the all-new RX-7, and the return of the Roadster, the Miata. That's why our 626 feels personal, and our MX-6 feels timeless. It's why every Mazda will fulfill its promise in a way no other car can.
The hair is gross. It makes you itch. It gets everywhere. It covers everything. It's down in the Epson printer. We groom hundreds of dogs a week, literally. It's a lot of hair. Big long hairs like this, little tiny hairs. It's a disgusting mess.
After 8 years and 29,830 pounds of dog hair, Singing Scissors Pet Care Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico is still operating at a healthy clip. So is their Epson printer.
And the printer's totally fuzzy and gross inside. It just seems to keep going no matter what.
You know where I'm going tomorrow?
Where?
I'm flying all the way to Asia.
Can our plane fly there?
Well, maybe if you throw it real hard, it just might.
When you have business on the other side of the world, choose the airline that just cut up to 3 hours off your travel time to cities throughout Asia. With service to more Asian cities than any other U.S. airline, Northwest Airlines, the leading airline to Asia. Some people just know how to fly.
Mothers have learned from countless doctors and pharmacists to take care of coughs with Robitussin. And they've taken this advice home. Robitussin, recommended by Dr. Mom. Ask your doctor or pharmacist.
Britain's Queen Elizabeth got a cold reception from protesters in Germany today as she tried to heal decades of bad blood between the two countries. The Queen attended a prayer service in the city of Dresden. That's the city that was devastated during World War II, perhaps more than any other, by an air attack by U.S. and British bombers. About 35,000 people were killed. The protesters booed and whistled at the Queen. They said they were demonstrating against a British memorial set up to honor the commander who masterminded the bombing.
The new police chief of Los Angeles says the city's police force already is better prepared to handle civil disorder than it was 6 months ago. But Willie Williams says the city still has no complete plan for handling riots. His comment came in response to a report that criticizes LA's response when rioting broke out last April. The report was done by former FBI and CIA Director William Webster and Hubert Williams, president of the Washington-based Police Foundation. The report found that Chief Gates failed to provide a meaningful plan to control disorder. Mayor Bradley was criticized for failing to develop a crisis plan.
Preparation and training cannot be conducted in the midst of a crisis. Responsibility and authority must be in place and understood, and those in charge must have access to information and the ability to communicate orders swiftly to be successful. This was not present when civil disorder struck the city.
Clearly, that night we should have gone down there and shot a few people. That's, in retrospect, that's exactly what we should have done. We should have blown a few heads off. Just maybe that would have stopped everything.
Gates said on his radio talk show that the authors of the report are liars. Webster called Gates' charge silly talk.
They made him do his homework, and that, says a 13-year-old Oregon boy, is why he killed the couple with whom he was staying. At a pretrial hearing yesterday, he claimed in a taped police interview that he cut down the couple with shotgun blasts last April. He faces trial for aggravated murder. At the time, the boy was living with the couple while he waited for an opening in a boys' home. He had been removed from the custody of his biological mother. New York City authorities say a distraught teacher gave a student money to buy a gun and talked the teenager into trying to kill her. The student shot the teacher in the shoulder. She was not seriously injured. Authorities say the teacher was upset after learning she had multiple sclerosis. The 17-year-old student was arraigned yesterday on charges of attempted murder and weapons violations.
One of the 7 mistresses of millionaire industrialist Henry Mudd may appeal the outcome of her palimony suit. Eleanor Oliver lost her $5 million suit yesterday when a jury ruled that she broke her contract with Mudd months before he died in 1990. Oliver said Mudd let her live in a $600,000 house and promised her a trust fund in exchange for her friendship. A jury felt she broke the contract when she stopped seeing Mudd and called an attorney to protect her estate.
It was an extremely grueling experience for me to have to go through this, and I'm very drained from it.
I don't like to come out angry or disappointed and say I'm going to do this or that, but there are some grounds of appeal.
Mudd's widow, Vanessa, says she was relieved by the verdict.
The Space Shuttle Columbia was originally scheduled to begin its 10-day mission in just a couple of minutes, but there has been a delay. CNN correspondent Charles Jaco is here now with the latest.
Well, Bob, you're exactly right. In fact, according to our clock, about 22 seconds ago, the Shuttle Columbia should have blasted off on its 13th mission. Right now, as you can see, there are whitecaps out over the Atlantic at the shuttle site, and that is indeed one of the problems. There are high winds at the Kennedy Space Center. In fact, those winds are above 15 knots an hour at the emergency landing site at KSC. That violates criteria for a safe landing. In addition, there is bad weather over the Mediterranean. That affects 2 emergency shuttle landing sites in Spain, one at Zaragoza, the other at Morón, and the other emergency landing site at Ben Gurir in Morocco. So they're dealing essentially with 4 weather problems, 3 at the transatlantic sites, 1 at Kennedy Space Center. Now, earlier today, the crew boarded the shuttle. They've been on board the shuttle for quite some time right now.
Commander Jim Weatherby.
5-man, 1-woman crew, 5 U.S. citizens, 1 Canadian. We're going to be on this 10-day mission. Unless something changes, they have to be out of the shuttle, unless it launches by 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time. That is 2.5 hours from now. The launch window runs a little over 30 minutes longer than that, but they have to be out in about 2.5 hours because that's as long as NASA will allow them to lie on their backs inside the crew compartment in the shuttle. So for right now, we're in a hold. We don't know how long this hold is going to be, but they have to wait for high winds at the Kennedy Space Center and bad weather at the transatlantic sites. We'll be here and let you know what happens next. Bob?
Thanks, Charles. And coming up, how Toronto really hopes to blow the lid off Sky Dome as Blue Jay bats aim for the fences and the World Series history books.
Shredded wheat. It's just good stuff.
This was not a typical business trip. We spent a lot of time on boats and in canoes traveling into the Amazon. I could not imagine any machine going through more than this Epson did. Sometimes you have to get a key a few times because you knew you were squashing bugs underneath.
In the last 5 years, environmental consultant Richard Fuller has put in over 107,000 unusually grueling miles of business travel. So has his Epson computer.
We dropped the machine into the Amazon and we put it in the sun, let it dry out for a little while. The next day it worked fine. My Epson's been around the world twice. It's fabulous.
You know the drill these days.
Interest rates go down, interest rates go up. Spend a lot of money, make a little money. Prices start to rise, prices start to fall, expenses climb higher, deductions plunge lower. Now, just hold on a second. You've got another business trip coming up, but you know how to control those costs. Who in the world has 3,300 locations and always helps you find a comfy room at a great price? Call Best Western at 1-800-528-1234.
Much has been said about issues in this election.
If we want to change our country, we simply have got to change our schools.
Where exactly do the candidates stand, point by point?
We are in deep trouble in this country on this health care issue.
It's time to go beyond the speeches and look at their plans.
We've got to put our people back to work.
A one-hour special report reveals the final examination, Issues 92, Sunday, November 1st on CNN. Brought to you by Chrysler Plymouth.
When European settlers arrived on the Pacific shores of Canada, they soon began the development of a ferry system. The ferries came in all shapes and sizes and covered every foot of navigable coastline. Early in the history of the service, a decision was made to use Chinese chefs in the galleys. They had the experience to handle the challenging task of a fast-floating food service. Today, Chef So-So Wong of Victoria's Empress Hotel recreates one of the classic dishes of the Chinese cook. The technique is stir-frying. The major ingredients are shrimps, scallops, and snow peas. A little vegetable oil goes into a wok. A little garlic, shrimp, scallops, snow peas, carrots, onions, baby corn, some sesame oil, and some oyster sauce. Noodles are cooked in simmering chicken stock, drained and put onto a serving plate. The stir-fried shrimp and scallops go on top. A garnish of sliced scallions and a carrot cut to look like flowers. The chef's name may be So-So, but there's nothing so-so about her cooking.
If you'd like a copy of that recipe, just send me a stamped self-addressed envelope marked So-So Stir Fry. Send it to me at Box 2000 Ansonia Station, New York City. The zip is 10023. From Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, that's what's cooking for today. I'm Bert Wolf.
Washington apples. They're as good as you heard.
Yeah, my plane was 3 hours late last night.
Late? What about our presentation?
I'm all set.
But we made changes after you left.
Yeah, Jim faxed them to me.
And you made the changes?
On all 20 copies.
At that time of night? Well, how about the charts?
Done.
And the transparencies?
In color. Everything's bound and ready.
That's great. But how'd you do it?
Connections.
Connections? What connections?
Kinko's, your branch office 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Wow, you guys look great.
Oh, we were so young back then.
Mom, was it any easier when you got married?
No, but we pulled together. Just like the two of you will.
We're not starting out with very much.
We didn't either. But we saved. And we invested.
Since 1928, families have invested with Scudder, America's first family of no-load funds.
He came from outside the political establishment and mustered nationwide support. He hinted at running, decided against it, then finally entered the race. Ross Perot, his independent campaign inspired people looking for change. CNN Special Reports examines this unconventional candidate, the course of his campaign, and the effect he's having on U.S. politics. Perot, Saturday, 10 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN.
The world of politics is pretty unpredictable. Still, Bill Clinton's master strategist, James Carville, can be counted on to turn a little bit superstitious when one of his campaigns goes down to the wire. This year, He swears he's opting to roll out of bed on the left side rather than the right. He's also set to order his usual cheeseburger lunch on Election Day. In addition, he's told friends to ignore his birthday, October the 25th. Carville fears that happy wishes for him might jinx his candidate.
Can't be too careful.
Well, who knows?
Primary focus of weather interest today is around that little patch of ground called Cape Canaveral, Florida.
Ted Dexter has the weather for us today.
Indeed, we still have a breezy condition there, and it looks like it'll settle down, but hopefully not too late. Let me show you what's going on across the country from aloft here. You can see now some cloudiness with the front stretching down across the Florida Peninsula, but still the gusty breezes continue. The rain showers really not firing off here. A little bit later on in the afternoon, that will likely happen. Up in Toronto, beginning to clear just a bit more there as well, and through the nighttime it'll cool off, but only down into the 40s for this game time tonight. Back for the west, a few showers now. Western parts of the Gulf region, you can see cloudiness with a front across the western United States. Let me show you what's going to happen. Here's a forecast weather map. Still across Florida, we have the front. Most of the shower activity confined to the extreme southern parts on down into the Caribbean, off across the Bahamas. Still some rain and snow in the north and eastern United States with that low pressure center that's throwing some cloudiness over our game in Toronto throughout this nighttime. High pressure building into the midwestern United States, keeping it nice and clear and helping to warm it up too. Still more mild air moving into the plains, the western United States, with some rain and snow, or well, primarily rain shower activity there. You got to get up into Canada and cooler air to find any snow. High temperatures through the afternoon look like this. Still cool. The north and eastern United States, southern tier of the nation, on into the plains. It'll be mild, very mild. Out across the western U.S., still kind of on the chilly side through the mountains, 50s and 60s, the south and the western United States, much milder there. Now, forecast for cities around the nation. Still bundling up going to the stadium in Toronto, but inside 72. Bob?
Apropos of that, Ted, the Blue Jays are just one game away now from being the first baseball team outside the U.S. ever to win the World Series. Last night's 2-1 victory over the Braves gives Toronto a 3-1 edge in the series. Game 5 set for tonight again in Toronto. If the Braves win tonight, Game 6 will be played this weekend in Atlanta.
Once again, update you on a shuttle that was scheduled to go up, maybe about 10 or 11 minutes ago, 11:16 Eastern Time. But NASA has decided to delay the launch because of winds. They want to see if those won't die down a bit before they send the shuttle up. And they had said before they would delay it for at least 20 minutes and put it up maybe around 11:36. But whenever it goes up, CNN's Charles Jaco is here, and he is watching that, and he will have the latest information for us.
In the meantime, we thank you for joining us on Day Watch. I'm Bob Cain.
I'm Donna Kelley. Good to have you along. Catherine Crier is here, and she'll give you a preview of what's coming up in the next half hour right here on CNN. Catherine.
Thanks, Donna. Bob. President Bush says people don't pay attention to polls. Bill Clinton says he hasn't won the election by a long shot, despite polls showing him with a substantial lead. And Ross Perot says he deals with people, not polls. Today on Crier and Company, the truth behind polls, what they say, what they hide. Join me following the financial break right after this.
Coming up, Crier and Company, followed by News Hour after this local commercial break here on CNN.
Got a second? Let's talk about my Chevy Lumina. No, I'm not a famous actress. I'm just an average Iowan like you. So you can relate when I say safety is important, especially when the kids are along. Lumina's anti-lock brakes really convinced us. They say you can't put a price on the important things like safety. Believe me, this little number is worth it.
The Chevy Sticker Police are on patrol. That means Lumina's sticker price is unchanged from last year. See your Central Iowa Chevy Geo dealer today.
On October 31st, 1992, join the Reverend William Sloan Coffin and other local leaders for a conference called Toward Positive Change, Reversing the Effects of Racism and Sexism. For information, call the Presbytery of Des Moines at 276-4991.
This
is CNN.
I'm Terry Keenan at the New York Stock Exchange. Blue chip stocks are about where they started, pressured in part by a weak bond market. Right now, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is down just about 1/100th of a point at 3187. Big board volume is heavy, 91 million shares traded. The other key markets are posting losses. Sears stock is down 3/8 at 41 3/4. That after reporting a third quarter loss of $833 million. The company taking a $1.25 billion charge at its Allstate unit. That to cover losses from Hurricanes Andrew and Deniki. But some surprisingly good news on the nation's unemployment front. Applications for initial jobless claims fell by 5,000 to 368,000 in early October. That's a 2-year low. Those numbers, though, are held down by a federal emergency jobless program not included in the weekly figures. U.S. bond prices are lower following that sign of economic strength, but coming back from earlier lows. Right now, the Treasury's 30-year bond is off 5/32 in price, the yield at 7.6%. And that's the latest in financial headlines. I'm Terry Keenan, reporting live from the New York Stock Exchange.
People don't believe the polls. You look at the elections from recent times. Look at what happened to John Major in England. Look at Governor Engler in Michigan, 14 points back the day before, Sunday before the election. I mean, I just don't think people trust the polls.
There are some people who say that this election is over. They are dead wrong. There are some people who say that the West is going to be Republican no matter what, and they ought to be dead wrong because you know better.
Hello, I'm Catherine Crier. Welcome to Crier and Company. The political polls. Well, the candidates love them when they're ahead, hate them when they're behind. And despite what the candidates might say, they seldom ignore the latest voter survey. Well, joining us to explore the truth behind the polls are Linda DiVall, president of American Viewpoint, a Republican polling firm, Nancy Belden, a partner in the Democratic polling firm of Belden and Rusinello, and Gloria Borger, assistant managing editor of U.S. News and World Report. Welcome, everyone. Linda, let me begin with you. Who gets polled? We're always reading about these polls. Who are these people answering questions?
Well, it's the American public. I mean, anybody has an opportunity of getting surveyed during the course of a campaign. I think a Gallup poll back a couple years ago asked the percentage of people who had ever really been called, and I think it was basically in single digits. But the fact of the matter is that sampling should theoretically allow everybody an equal opportunity of participating in a sampling framework.
So what happens, Nancy, do they go into a certain community and just sort of randomly call? Literally, how is a poll set up?
No, actually, the beauty of polling today is that because telephones in the United States are so pervasive, that any population, be it the American public in general, American voters across the country, or just voters in one precinct in Texas, can, as Linda says, have an equal opportunity of falling into any one poll. So the polling survey research happens by taking all the numbers, all the telephone numbers that might fall into that population that's of interest at that point, and systematically going through and at random picking out numbers to call.
What kind of distortions might you find in polls?
Well, you can find all sorts of distortions. You may find distortions for what we call not at homeness. People, like, for example, young people are hard to find at home. And they may be left out of a poll that moves too quickly or that does not do adequate callbacks to try to find those people. There are many, many sources of error. In fact, one of the biggest issues that people like Linda and I are concerned about is the fact that when polls get reported, often they get reported with a plus or minus percentage or percentage points that supposedly reflect the margin of error. In fact, there can be error and distortions and all sorts of problems with polls that come from all other sorts of other sources.
Okay, Gloria, even as a snapshot in time, how accurate do you see polls in general?
Well, you know, it's very hard for a journalist to judge how accurate any poll is. We seem to be paying a lot more attention to them. Sometimes I wonder what we'd write about if we didn't have the polls to write about. But we've become a little more adept at looking at the sample. Are these registered voters, for example? Are they likely voters? What's the age group of these voters? You know, kinds of questions that we're now looking at as journalists and saying, okay, is this poll biased? Looking at the questions. We're a lot better at looking at questions because, of course, as you know, everything can depend on how you ask a question or when you ask a question. So I think we're getting a little bit more sophisticated about polls. However, I'm afraid we do depend on them an awful lot.
Well, Linda, in terms of that sophistication, are you seeing that in the way questions are asked and the way that polls are created and utilized, that they truly are more sophisticated in giving you better information?
Well, some are and some aren't. I mean, the problems that I think we're seeing with some of the fluctuation of the daily tracking numbers, for example, the battleground poll is done Sunday through Thursday. They avoid interviewing on Saturday and Sunday nights, which is when you have a tremendous amount of fluctuation in the polling data. I think sometimes I'm the only one at home on Friday nights. You know, most Americans are not, so you do tend to get a skewed sample then. And question placement has a lot to do with it. If you're going to ask a string of questions about the economy, that might reflect badly on President Bush. So question placement has a lot to do with it as well, and those are things that the professional pollsters take into account.
Catherine, I also think there's sort of a question of, do people tell the truth when they answer polls? You know, if you ask somebody a question about a very sensitive issue, say a racial issue or abortion, or even who you're going to vote for, which is a very personal thing, there's also a feeling that people may not tell the truth all the time.
Well, but that's an extremely important issue, and it's something that I think as polling is used more, I'd like to come to the defense of the use of polling more and more journalistically and in a lot of other areas. But as polls are used, as they become used more and more, we get better at dealing with those kinds of things. And as we confront the issues, the new issues that maybe weren't an issue before, we've now discovered that people may lie when there is a lot of racial tension in a particular election, for example. But we uncover those problems as we go, and as journalists and pollsters and the public work together to make that better and to improve those methodologies to overcome those problems.
But Nancy, might that not be a concern, though? Because if there are all these nuances that you might be reading into the polls, those are not necessarily reflected when the numbers are thrown out in headlines or thrown out to the American public. So might it not be misleading?
Well, the problem is that what people want to think about, that everybody wants to think that polls are the answer, and not everybody, but a lot of people want to use them in lieu of an election. They are not an election. The election is only on election day. They are a reflection at any point in time, hopefully, of how people feel. Now, you come to the problem of did people in particular circumstances not tell the pollster the truth, or did the pollster and the polling organization not know how to get at the truth? And yes, perhaps you see headlines that overly report or react to something, but in the long run, what we learn, for example, in the case of elections where there have been racial differences in the vote based on race than what people told pollsters, what I think is interesting and important about that is that we are uncovering as an American electorate the fact that people felt uncomfortable answering that question accurately.
Gloria, what about the effect of Ross Perot, a third-party candidate in all of this? Does it sort of throw a lot of these poll numbers out the window?
Yeah, I think particularly during Ross Perot's first foray into presidential politics kind of drove all of us crazy, because we weren't sure whether the question you needed to pay more attention to was who's your first choice for president or who's your second choice for president. And we started having to look into kind of mathematical permutations and models and how this could work, and it got all of us very, very confused. So I think particularly at that point, we really weren't sure who was up and who was down and what it meant.
And Linda, we've got the swing voters, and a lot of swing voters. Reagan Democrats, where are they going? The independents, the Perot supporters. How does that affect the polls?
Well, you really have to look at this state by state right now. Gloria makes a good point about Ross Perot's vote. I mean, there are two states in particular I think you have to pay attention to, Colorado and Texas, where you see Perot's vote in Colorado has gone up. You see in Texas that George Bush now leads. The question becomes, as we go into the last week of the campaign, traditionally about 25% of the voters make up their minds at the end. They tend to be younger voters. They tend to be independents. They tend to be slightly more female in orientation. The complicated factor here is indeed the Perot vote. Will those people stay with their candidate who they think is the best way to indeed totally challenge the system? Right now, he is a threat to Clinton because he divides up that change vote. Or do those people say to themselves, I really am not certain that he has the wherewithal to lead this country, and begin to re-examine the other two during the course of the last weekend of the campaign? So at this point, it's wide open if that happens.
Is it pretty hard then to tell just how strong a candidate's support is with these poll numbers?
Well, what we do, and I'm sure Nancy does as well, is we ask intensity of support. Are you definitely voting for that person, probably, or just leaning? Some of the overnight polls that you see in the news media don't do that. If you look at some of the surveys that we've seen that are public domain, I think it shows about a third of the voters either weakly committed to the candidates or undecided. So that still is a significant number of people who are casting about to solidify their vote at the close of this campaign.
You know, Catherine, the interesting thing you're saying about Ross Perot, in the last debate, he said to people, no, just because I'm last in the polls, don't think you're throwing away your vote. This vote can be a real vote. I can win, because what he's really worried is that in the end, people are going to go for Bush and Clinton and forget about him because they feel like they're just throwing it away.
All right, well, coming up next, we'll discuss that. What about when the polls are wrong? Why some candidates win despite the numbers.
2 a.m., 36 Pine Street. Apartment 4C has a backache and can't sleep. 3C overdid her afternoon workout and is paying the price. 2C had an aching back, but fortunately, she also has Tylenol PM, with extra-strength Tylenol pain reliever, plus a gentle ingredient to help her sleep. And a good night's sleep was all she needed to make her day a whole lot brighter. Tylenol PM, so you can rest easy.
I'm having a bad hair day.
You're better than my therapist. How about blonde?
I love the shine.
I only use Red Kit.
So healthy looking. Can't get this at a drugstore. Smells good.
In the hands of today's most gifted stylists, you'll find hair care products that produce extraordinary body, shine, and condition. Red Kit, the power behind beautiful hair.
Hey, there I go again.
Yeah, you always kept me going.
Dad, did you ever think to yourself, someday that little guy will have his own baby?
No, not really. I was too busy thinking, how can I afford to raise this kid?
Yeah, that's what I've been thinking about with Brian. How can I afford it?
Well, I'll tell you how I did it.
Since 1928, families have invested with Scudder, America's first family of no-load funds.
They're manipulative, elusive, and destructive in relationships. I'm talking about passive-aggressive men, and we're going to find out how to live with them and survive. Today on Sonia Live, 1 p.m. Eastern, only on CNN.
John Major wouldn't be prime minister, and many people in the Congress wouldn't be there if they got discouraged by or overly encouraged by polls.
Nancy Belden, the British showed us that polls can be wrong. John Major won despite the numbers. What happened?
Well, polls are often wrong, and if you want to say wrong, in that they, it's not that example is just one of many. Polls sometimes fail to really identify the right electorate or to ask the questions in the right way. I think that's what is important to note about the statements of people like the president is making on the clip that you just showed, is that they're making that because, in fact, they are trying to spin their own numbers. They know if you look at enough polling data, particularly in this election and across all the good polls, bad polls, polls done by campaigns, polls done by private industry, that somewhere in there is the truth. And while things are moving around and we see conflicting numbers, you do see some very clear trends there, and the president, unfortunately for him, is looking at numbers that are very pessimistic. So he has to draw and look to those instances where something did in fact go wrong.
Well, Linda, then, are there any trends that President Bush could be encouraged by? Could we see that sort of upset here in the United States?
Well, again, I think that the major analogy is a good one, and President Bush also talked about Governor Engler, who was about 15 points behind 48 hours before the election in Michigan in 1990 when he was running against Democratic incumbent Governor Blanchard. The fact of the matter is, yes, sometimes the polls can be wrong, but you have to look at two things. One, last-minute decision-making, as I talked about earlier, about 25% making up their minds the last week of the campaign. But more importantly, when the last poll is taken versus when the final vote is cast. And a lot of things happen during the course of a campaign, not just television advertising, people talking to each other. They're reassessing the field overall, so there are a lot of other stimuli that people are reacting to. So you have to look at not just the last poll, but what has intervened between the last poll and when that ultimate vote has been cast.
And Gloria, that's certainly the bailiwick of a journalist. What are the sorts of things that you will be looking at besides numbers as we approach November 3rd?
Well, I think we're going to be looking at crowds. You're going to be looking at kind of enthusiasm that you see. We're going to be looking at the way congressional and Senate races are shaping up, what people are telling us about whether they're more likely to vote straight ticket this time or whether they're still likely to be ticket splitters. You know, our role as journalists is to get out there and try and interview real people ourselves. And I think we should use the poll numbers and say, okay, this is what the polls are telling us. Let's go out and report what we see. You know, we're also being spun on both sides, I might add. Bill Clinton is saying don't pay attention to the polls because he doesn't want voters who like him to get very sanguine about this election and then not show up to vote and say, oh, Bush has lost. So he's trying to say don't look at the polls. Bush is trying to say don't look at the polls, and we're trying to look at the voters.
Nancy, what about internal polls? The campaigns do their own, so even if they say they're ignoring the outside polls, they're certainly paying attention to their own numbers.
Well, they are, and that's why they know what spin to put on things, because they know, first of all, they may know or believe that they know if the polls that are being put out in the public are wrong. They have some other insight that they are going to use internally and that they're going to use in their spin making. Internal polls probably most of the time, in fact, reflect the good, well-established, well-done polls that the public has seen as well in the media. They have a lot more detail in them, however. Polls that anybody conducts for a campaign, a candidate, or a party have a lot of detail, all sorts of things about why and under what circumstances and what might change your mind and what if you learned this message. A great many other things. They're not just the horse race.
So the Republican presidential polls, internal polls reflect things differently than we're seeing in the major polls?
Well, we won't know that probably until some academic studies come out after the elections and try to reflect on that. I would suspect that they are showing the same things in general in the horse race type question that we're seeing publicly.
But I would also think that, for example, the reason you've seen the president attack Bill Clinton on the trust issue is that their internal polls are showing that people are very soft on Bill Clinton on that particular issue, and that's a vulnerability they feel they can take advantage of.
So the real issues that these polls are going to point to that we then see turned into the political strategy,
well,
right?
Well, the difference between the public domain polls and what each campaign does is you try to change the numbers in a campaign. So your campaign pollster is going to be asking questions that will hopefully serve to change the dynamic by which people are judging this contest, as opposed to simply saying who's ahead or who's behind, which is what we see with the overnight polls that the media has done.
How much credibility do voters really give these polls? What kind of perception change might it create?
Well, I think, you know, that's where the press comes in. And the question is, if we say that George Bush has been consistently behind by, 15 points for the last month or whatever it is, and that consistently the public says that 2/3 of the public believes that the country's on the wrong track, we have an influence. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, and I think that could convince people to stay home, or it doesn't matter if I vote or whatever, and I think that's a bad way that the polls can have an influence, particularly if they're consistent.
Well, Nancy, do you see that kind of influence in this election?
Well, I actually think that this election, and I think there's a lot of data to support this, is so exciting in some ways, both because people are angry about the economy, want to change. There's so much going on. There's this third-party or non-party candidate that people are really enthusiastically signing up to vote, and I sense, even just in focus groups and in polling that we're doing, just on a personal sort of anecdotal level, maybe a pollster shouldn't do that, but I sense that a lot more enthusiasm and interest and get out the voteness that's going to happen. I think that it's important for us to recognize that the reason that before we start dumping on whether or not polls will discourage or encourage people to vote, that the reason that the public and the media are obsessed with or interested in and use polls a lot is because polls do something that nothing else can do. They can bring, except an election. An election only does it across one plane. And they bring together enough people, hopefully scientifically selected and questioned in a very fair and good way, that we can actually get a reading on what people opine, what they think, what they believe, what they want at any point in the election or in any other process that we're going through.
Linda, do you see that as a positive effect?
Well, I think the public probably doesn't pay too much attention to what it is we're producing overnight. But I think what the polls do serve as a purpose for them as a way of keeping score. I mean, this country, we like to keep score. Who's ahead, who's behind, what's going on day to day.
But it's certainly legitimate if you've got a touchdown that you can register, you know something has happened, versus sort of these numbers that appear and vary depending on which poll you look at.
But see, the point is that the final poll is going to be Election Day. What's happening right now in this contest is we have never been involved in a presidential race that has the dynamics of this one. Right. And I think you have to say to yourself, be very careful. Conventional wisdom has been wrong more often than right this year. Just hold on a bit and let's see how the last 10 days play itself out.
All right, well, coming up, does the media put too much emphasis on the polls? Stay with us.
Coming on video cassette. He was a stranger.
I've no wish to fight you.
No wish to fight. In a new land.
Maybe this is my destiny.
He left behind everything he knew for the only thing he ever wanted.
Stay away from her, do you hear me?
Joseph!
Together, they found a country big enough for their dreams. Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, from director Ron Howard, Far and Away. Coming soon on video cassette.
When your sinus and nasal congestion feels this bad, what can you do? Last year, you wanted to call the doctor. Last year, you wanted a prescription. But this year, Tavis D in its full prescription strength is available without a prescription. Just one tablet helps relieve 12 hours worth of painful congestion and sneezing.
Guess what? I'll be there after all.
Tavis D. One tablet, 12 hours, and now no prescription.
Simple Green's the only cleaner we use now. I can dilute the concentrate so it's really economical. An eighth cup makes 16 ounces of all-purpose cleaner. I dilute it in the reusable spray bottle. Simple Green cleans just about everything. Full strength, it even cuts tough grease and oil stains. I like to keep things clean, but I want my kids to live in a cleaner world, too.
Simple Green keeps your world clean.
Now, new Simple Green Hand Cleaner Gel cleans just about anything dirty from your hands, with or without water.
For many people, alcohol is an obsession that often results in anxiety, depression, or other emotional problems. It's okay to ask for help. I did.
Call Woodridge now. When you're investing in a country with political and social stability, the European community's fastest-growing economy, you may be giving it your best shot. Portugal, all in one.
I just never voted. I never really felt like the need to, I guess, until this year.
I think it's important enough this time around that everybody tries to do what they can.
From brilliant celebrations to a simple lunch on the deck. From 1,000 activities to the joy of doing nothing at all. A kindness that comes easily, a genuine warmth. For a century and more, we've been preparing for a ship as magnificent as the Stottendown. Come, be among the first to experience her charms. An elegant new ship, a grand tradition. The good times of Holland America.
1 a.m., still awake. Your fever's worse. The coughing and congestion just keep you awake. This flu you handled today now feels out of control. You've got the night flu and you need maximum relief. TheraFlu introduces new maximum strength nighttime, the strongest hot liquid formula ever made. It relieves your worst flu symptoms so you can get the sleep you desperately need. New maximum strength nighttime from TheraFlu. Maximum flu relief so you can sleep.
Mariel, you're amazing.
Oh, JP, stop it.
No, really, you get to play so many people, yet you're always you.
Well, I do get a lot of help from a terrific hairstylist I trust.
We all know how important that is.
The thing I love is he doesn't make me just look good for the moment. He really takes care of my hair.
I'll bet I know how he does that.
Yes, of course. He only uses Paul Mitchell products, just like I do at home.
Well, I won't argue with that, but I will say this.
Yes, JP?
I still think you're amazing.
Paul Mitchell products are guaranteed only when purchased in fine salons.
George Bush. His career has taken him from business to public office to the highest level of government. How has his past shaped his performance as president? A Democracy in America special explores the public mind of George Bush. Sunday, 10 Eastern on CNN.
Thing I know, because I spend a lot of time with the American people, don't take polls, I spend time with people, is American people are tough people. They're willing to do what they have to do as long as it's right and it's fair.
Well, welcome back. Gloria Borger, some might say it's a sign of journalistic laziness, all this reliance on the polls. What do you think?
No, I don't think it's laziness. I think the polls provide a very valuable yardstick for us. I mean, to me, it's kind of a reality check. You know, you go out there and you can be in the cocoon of a campaign covering a candidate. You can interview voters whenever you get a chance at a candidate rally. You can do focus groups with your own publication, which we do. But I think that the polls provide a reality check for us, and we say, look, this is what we're hearing out there on the campaign trail and the people we interview, and this is what the polls are telling us, and let's take a look at both of those pieces of information and see where they mesh.
Isn't it too much emphasis, though, on the horse race rather than the issues?
I think that's always the problem in a presidential campaign, particularly as you get closer and closer to election day. So yes, there can be an emphasis on overnight polls and that kind of thing, but I think, you know, in the end, if you use them properly, you don't abuse them, they're just a tool, but they're not all of your reporting, I think they can be very useful.
All right, Nancy, you said you had your visceral reaction and then you've got your look at the numbers, but look into that crystal ball, your numbers, whatever you pick. How accurate are these polls going to be when we come down to Election Day? How close is this race going to be?
Well, I think that we have to come back again and again to the point. The polls are not the election. We can't say that they were wrong if the last poll taken is different from the election, unless the last poll taken is one taken 2 seconds before people went to the booth, which I might add, just to get on one of my own particular points of interest, is the importance of exit polls, because in fact they are something that can reflect and can help us understand, and the journalists use extensively and very well, help us understand why and how people voted. They tell us something that no simple election returns ever tell us, which is, did women vote differently in the last analysis than men? Did African Americans and Hispanics and Anglos vote differently? And I think that you just have to keep remembering that the polls are not the election.
All right, well, Linda, give us some clues. What should we be looking for in polling numbers, in questions, in the directions between now and November 3rd?
I think there are a couple things to look at. First of all is the extent to which partisans of each candidate are supporting their candidate. In other words, what % of the vote is George Bush getting from Republicans? Conversely, how well is Clinton doing with Democrats? Secondly is to look at the swing voters in the past, the so-called Reagan Democrats, young voters who have begun to switch to Bill Clinton. Is George Bush able to get those voters back? And third is something I referred to a little bit earlier. It's what I call late decision makers. Those people who tend to fixate on the campaign late, and I think a lot of people did that at the end. We had approximately 90 million viewers watching this package of debates. I think they are beginning to assess who it is that they are going to vote for. And the one thing that we put a great deal of reliance on that you don't see in some of these public domain polls is what is it that people are reacting to. You heard that the Bush campaign is heavily emphasizing the trust factor with Bill Clinton. You ask people, what is it that you've seen, read, or heard about the candidates? You have a little bit different way of finding out what it is they're reacting to, and thus trying to change the dynamic of the campaign right through to Election Day by framing that ultimate question to voters to persuade them to vote for that candidate.
All right. Linda DiVall, Nancy Belden, Gloria Borger, thanks very much for a look at American polling. Now, if you'd like to write to us, send your letters to Crier and Company, P.O. Box 740-166, Atlanta, Georgia, 30374-0166, or send us a fax to 404-681-3578. I'm Catherine Crier. Thanks so much for joining us today. And tomorrow on Crier and Company, Miss America, Liaza Cornett, and other first-time presidential voters talk about how and why they'll cast their ballots. Join us then.
Coming up, News Hour, followed by Sonia Live after a word from your local cable system here on CNN.
What'll I do